everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing a review for Sistersong by Lucy Holland. So this is a standalone historical fantasy that is set in 6th century post-Roman Britain, and it is a retelling of the Trois Sisters, which is a traditional murder ballad, which I'll link a version of the ballad below if you want to know more about the story that this is based on. But in this, we're following 3 siblings, unlike in the original ballad, which is following 2 sisters. So we're following these 3 siblings who are the children of a king, and through their family they have this special connection to the land, and that also kind of gives them different powers. And we're following them as they are all young adults who are kind of trying to figure out what their lives are going to be. So the oldest sibling, she was severely injured in a fire when she was very young, and now she's kind of worried about the future and whether anyone will want to marry her and whether she will be able to find love. The middle sibling was assigned female at birth but wants to be acknowledged as their parents' son. And then the youngest sibling, she really wants like adventure, and she feels very also ignored and, you know, unappreciated by their family. And these siblings also are in a situation where they're kind of feeling attacked on all sides because the Saxons are invading their land, but they're also feeling very spiritually attacked as Christianity is gaining a foothold in this country and also pushing out the old ways, and by doing so is kind of causing this disconnection from the land, which gave them powers, which also allowed them to protect their land and their people from invaders like the Saxons. And eventually there's also a love interest that is introduced, which 2 of the siblings are both interested in, which causes friction between the 2 of them. And there's also a Merlin character who is a mentor to these siblings. Before diving into the rest of the review, I want to put some content warnings for transphobia, misgendering, dead naming. There's a scene where the trans characters' masculine clothing is like forcibly removed and they're forced into wearing feminine clothing. There's also just general violence, and there's gore. Especially there's a point towards the end of the book that can get kind of gruesome, which if you're familiar with the ballad, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, let's first dive into the pacing. So it took a little while for me to really get into this book. I think the first third of the book was a little bit tough for me because I wasn't quite sure where it was going. It was really about a third of the way into the book that I think the story really started to take shape and feel like it was really moving forward. But then about halfway into the book was when I really got into it. So over the course of a few days I was reading that first half of the book, but once I hit the halfway point I just binged the rest of the book. I pretty much read it all in one sitting, and I stayed up till like 5 a.m. reading it because I just didn't want to put it down. Next, I want to talk about the characters and relationships. So as I said, we're following 3 points of view, which are the 3 siblings. I definitely feel like the middle sibling was the most well developed, and while each of the siblings I think had approximately the same amount of page time, the middle sibling felt like he had the most attention and felt the most developed. And I also think he was the most easy to like, and I did really like his character. I would have read an entire book just from his perspective. And I also really liked the romantic subplot that his character had. I think that it did a really good job of feeling like the tension and the awkwardness and the wanting, and I actually ended up feeling more invested in that romantic subplot than in the main romance of the story, which makes sense to some degree because there are things about the characters that are involved in the like main romance of it that makes them kind of unlikable, or like I felt like that romance, it was harder to get emotionally invested in, but I really liked the romantic subplot that the middle sibling had. Then as for the other 2 siblings, the oldest and the youngest, their characters were very annoying. One of them starts out okay and then just like over the course of the book becomes just like insufferable, and the other one starts out pretty insufferable and then gets a little bit better as the story goes on. So their characters were kind of frustrating, even though I understood why they did the things that they did. but I guess I did appreciate that there was character change over the course of the book. I don't know if it was necessarily like growth so much, because not all of them grow or become better, but they do definitely change over the course of the story, which is something that I appreciate in characters. Something that I found frustrating though about the way that the story was constructed and the way it did these sibling relationships was that the siblings stay fairly separate from one another throughout the book. There are certain like touch points that they have, and they're very aware of each other, but there really wasn't as much interaction between the siblings as I was hoping for, and it felt like they had individual journeys that were all kind of parallel to each other, instead of being more involved in each other's lives. I also felt like it just didn't dive as deeply into the sibling relationships, and I was actually hoping for more fraught relationships between these two siblings, and I actually ended up being more interested in the relationships that each of the siblings had to their parents. Now onto the plot. There are things about the plot that I think were very predictable. You could kind of predict like who was going to betray who, or like what was going to happen. However, I don't necessarily think that detracts from the story, because even though you know that this is going to end badly, it's a murder ballad. Someone's gonna die and like things are gonna go wrong. It still has this feeling of like it's a train wreck that you can't look away from, and you have to like see how it all, you know, unfolds. And that's a lot of why I ended up like binging the second half of the book, because once I got to a certain point, I just was like, I know that this is all going to go downhill, and I know kind of what's going to happen, but I have to watch it happen. I also think that as a retelling, it changes enough that you don't know exactly what's going to happen, even though like the overall end result I knew. I think it changed enough to make it interesting, and there were some things that I liked and some things that I didn't like about some of the changes that were made. I think that it made it less straightforward plot-wise, and so that made it more interesting because it fleshed out the plot of this story, but I think that it made it more simplistic relationship-wise, and I think it lost some of the like grittiness and darkness in the relationships between these characters that I was really hoping for from this retelling. I also a little bit feel like maybe the retelling kind of got away from the author a little bit, because there's an element of the story that's kind of like the, I don't know, like the pivotal moment of this retelling or of this story, that ended up feeling like it didn't quite fit into the story that this book became. Because by the time we got to that like climactic scene or scenes that really defines the original story, it felt out of place and also a little bit unnecessary to the story, and just like the way that things had played out. So in summation, this was a little bit of a different take on this retelling than what I had been expecting, and maybe a little different from what I personally had been wanting from it. There were some things that I wish had been a little richer or a little bit darker, and had focused more on the deterioration of these sibling relationships instead of their individual journeys. But still, it was really fun to see this story be retold. It is a story that I've really enjoyed for a long time. I really liked that there were some parts that got kind of gruesome and gross in it. I think that it had also some really nice descriptions of nature and of the magic. There are some specific scenes that still really stand out in my mind. I did really like the middle sibling. I liked his journey and his character development, his romantic subplot, and I really would have read like an entire book just about his character because I really liked him. And I also really liked Merlin's character in this. I haven't really talked about him, but I really liked Merlin's role in this and the way that Merlin acts as a mentor to these siblings. So overall, I really enjoyed it. I feel like I want to convey that I did really like this book because I feel like I might be a little overly critical of it, just because this is a story that I've really liked for a long time, the story of the Trois sisters. And so I went into this with very high expectations of what this was going to be and kind of what I wanted out of it, or what feeling I wanted from it based on the feeling that the ballad gives me. And so I feel like I might be a little overly critical of it, but I did really enjoy it, and I think that a lot of other people would enjoy it, especially if you like this kind of time period and setting and this sort of historical fantasy in this setting. So I gave this book 4 stars, and I also definitely would read something else from this author if she comes out with any other books that I think sound interesting. So that is all for my review of Sistersong by Lucy Holland. If you've read this book, let me know what you thought of it, or if you haven't, let me know if you're interested in it. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!